Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the Policy Office in the Division of Institution and Award Support at the National Science Foundation. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Spring 2022 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. We hope that you enjoyed this session and the Grants Conference, and I'm pleased to present this session, which will cover the NSF merit review process. And this session is being presented by Nigel Sharp and Karen Santoro.
Good afternoon and welcome to the discussion of the merit review process for proposals at the NSF, as this afternoon's session in the Spring 2022 Grants Conference. Next slide. I'm here with Karen Santoro from our Office of the General Counsel to give you the rundown. My name's Nigel Sharp. I'm a Program Director in the Division of Astronomical Sciences. I've been at NSF for almost 20 years, over which time I've done everything from small grants to large facilities and almost every aspect of NSF in between. And I'll just get Karen to introduce herself.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Karen Santoro, the Assistant General Counsel for Ethics in the Office of the General Counsel at NSF, and I've been here for 14 years.
Thank you, Karen. I think we're ready to go to the next slide. So what we're going to discuss today is your proposal preparation submission, and then what we do with it. In particular, the proposal review process and the possible processing of awards. Unfortunately, NSF can't fund a very large percentage of the proposals we receive. And so it really helps for you to understand how we handle proposals in order to understand the decision process. NSF's processes are quite flexible and are actually done differently for different programs, for proposals of different sizes and complexity and so on. And so we're going to cover many of the variations, but there's always a chance that something you have experienced does not come up. And so we're going to repeat this mantra regularly: ask early, ask often. You should always contact a program officer in the area you're intending to apply to, or indeed several program officers if your research covers different fields. And so you'll hear us say ask early, ask often as throughout the grants conference. Next. So the first thing, of course, is we generally find ourselves apologizing for how long it takes to get a proposal decision through to you. And part of this process is to explain to you why it takes us can take us a long time, and this process that you see here. Starting at the top, we go down with an opportunity announced in one of different ways. You go through, read it, decide, and submit. You should probably be aware that the fast lane submission process is going away in the next few months. That's been announced and you should check into that. So it's a good idea to get familiar with submission through research.gov. Proposals come into the system. They're captured and added to the work list of a program officer like me. And then we go through and make these decisions. We go through a community review, a merit review. We don't emphasize enough, perhaps, that the merit review is controlled by criteria from the National Science Board, as well as solicitation-specific requirements. We have a combination of review methods, what we call ad hoc, which is basically a written review solicited from a single expert, through a panel, which involves a discussion amongst a group of experts, a combination of ad hoc and panel, but there's also a step of internal review by program officers. There's then an analysis, sometimes by a single program officer, sometimes by a group. It then goes to the division management, division director, for agreement, concurrence with the recommendation. So the program officer does not make the decision, they make the recommendation, and then it's agreed to. Declaration, a decline, we're very sorry, we can't fund it, goes immediately to the PI and the organization that submitted. Award recommendations then have to go through an additional legal step. Program officers do not commit money. We don't have the legal authority to do that. We have a division of grants and agreements, and each award gets a grants and agreements officer who is assigned to that award to make sure that all those steps are completed successfully. And we'll show you some of those steps as we move forward. So next. So very important advice. Please read the funding opportunity. If it's a solicitation, if it's a dear colleague letter, if it's a program announcement, there are different types, but please read them. One of the first things that will happen if you ask a program officer is that they will say, you know, have you read the section that says, and they'll often refer you to a specific section. We appreciate that the language is not always completely clear. Like a lot of things, we know what we meant when we wrote it. It isn't always exactly what you read when you see it. And so please ask for clarification. Don't forget, you do need to address all the review criteria. We recommend you understand how we do it. That's why we're giving this session. It's a good idea to proofread your material, make sure that you haven't left in a note to yourself. I have received proposals that say, and then according to add reference here, because they didn't complete that check step. And then check. There's a classic hiccup that can happen when proposals are submitted, that a piece of the proposal is accidentally submitted into the wrong slot in the system. And so we always recommend that you download your proposal back from our system to your home institution and compare it so that what we received is what you think you sent us. And we've had several hiccups along that in the past. And so we always recommend when you've submitted it, you press that final button. Don't just relax, go out and say, hey, I'm done. Go back in, download the whole thing back and check it. Okay, next. So when you submit a proposal, you indicate the program it's coming to. All proposals have to have a home. They may be cross-disciplinary, they may cross over programs, but they have to have a lead home. That's usually what you put first on your cover page. And so the proposal comes to that program. We check the proposals for completeness, timeliness, conforming to requirements. Number of these requirements are now being automatically checked on submission, like font size and margins. But there are still some that are handled by a human being and checked. We always have the right to return a proposal without review or refuse to accept it if it doesn't meet the requirements. And these are basically formatting and content requirements. Double spacing can be a nuisance. As I say, margins, the various things. Look in the preparation requirements. Now, sometimes because boundaries in programs are not always clear and because they can be fuzzy, because some projects overlap different programs at the NSF, we may decide that it's been submitted to the wrong program. And then in most cases, we'll try very hard to find a program willing to accept it. In some cases, it may not be possible, or there may be a mistake, but in others, we may decide that it should be evaluated by more than one program. And so you shouldn't be surprised if you see a range of opinions. And sometimes reviewers will even comment that it was in the wrong program. That's really not supposed to be a comment for the PI. That's more a comment for us that we've actually reviewed it in the wrong place. But so you shouldn't be concerned about that comment. So next. In that sense, you shouldn't be surprised if you find that your proposal is being considered by somebody else. The Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, PAPPG, has all the details, and you should always look at the most recent version. Most recent version of that guide is the one that applies at the time you submit your proposal. A lot of policies change because of guidance from Congress, because of laws, because of general Office of Management and Budget guidelines and so on. And so please always check the most recent version. It is not wise to submit a proposal that was turned down a few years ago without going through and checking for these sorts of variations. We have merit review principles and criteria which are intended to indicate how well a proposal fits with NSF's mission. The mission being primarily to promote the progress of science, but also to advance national health, prosperity, welfare, and secure the national defense. And like many government agencies, we always have, and for other purposes at the end. Next. So some of the things that can go wrong. Proposals that don't even make it to review. It's really wise to spend effort making sure you've got all this right, because it's intensely frustrating to put a lot of work into preparing a proposal and then have us send it back for some simple mistake that means you don't even get feedback on the content. So, separate statements, intellectual merit and broader impacts. We've changed the system to include section headings and so on that will prompt you to get this right. And so we're seeing far fewer people make this mistake than we used to. Still a few people who manage to get things wrong. You must have this broader impacts. It's very important that you consider the societal impact of the research you're planning to propose. It doesn't have to be a massive effort on your part, but it has to be sincere and meaningful. You are required to include a data management plan for every proposal. You can argue that you don't need a data management plan, but you should still put in a data management plan that says this project does not need a data management plan. And then we'll evaluate whether we agree with you or not. So you must have that. If you are asking for funding for a postdoc on the budget pages, then you must have a mentoring plan, which is a requirement to describe how you will help postdoctoral researchers, junior researchers in the postdoc slot to advance their careers and their understanding of academia. Next. There are some other reasons why your proposal might not be considered. Inappropriate for funding, we don't get a lot of those anymore. We still get a few. There are certain things that NSF is not supportive, particularly things like clinical research on human beings, which is the purview of the National Institutes of Health, or space missions, although there are some exceptions for things which are going to happen in space. Most of those are with NASA. We do still get occasional proposals submitted at the last minute. If there is some urgent activity that you really need funding for, it comes back to the ask early, ask often. Contact a program officer, find out if it's a possibility that we could do it quickly enough to be able to meet your deadline. You send in a proposal without talking to somebody where it's really tight and the activity is going to start soon, chances are it'll be sent back as there's no time. You talk to someone, maybe you can squeeze in under that sort of urgency. We do still see the occasional proposal submitted where we actually determined it was not invited, so it will come back. The one that causes perhaps the most grief is that we get occasional proposals submitted into different programs, which are essentially the same project. That's a very dodgy one, because of the interpretation of the word substantially, insubstantially similar, or essentially the same. And so in most cases, if we see a proposal come in that looks like a duplicate of something already submitted, most of us will actually contact the PI and say, look, these two look pretty much identical. Do you want to withdraw one of them and let us consider the other? The cover page for a proposal includes not just the primary program of consideration, but the option to select secondary programs, several if necessary. And we prefer, if the proposal is essentially the same project, that you add the other units into that cover page on a single proposal, rather than sending the same proposal to different programs. There are ways to handle this. Ask early, ask often. Next. Proposal preparation requirements, I already mentioned. Essentially, most of those are being handled automatically. This is one reason why you've got to be very careful about deadlines. If you get your proposal fully prepared and go to submit it at the last minute for a deadline, and there is a preparation error, like a margin violation, you haven't got much time to fix it. And so you should really try to get in ahead of the deadline. And because bullet 3 here says, hey, you don't make the deadline, you don't get considered. Program announcements, solicitations all have criteria. We can determine that you didn't meet those criteria. There are some solicitations that are very specific about the sort of project that they will support. And if you aren't there, we can return it because it just doesn't match. Many cases we'll try to find a home for it, as mentioned earlier, but not always. This other bullet here is also dependent upon the interpretation of substantially, and we've had more than one argument with people who say, well, I did revise it considerably. We do get people who send in proposals several years in a row and do not put a lot of effort into updating the proposal. I always recommend you have a proposal reviewed and we aren't able to fund it, reluctantly declining to support it. Pay attention to the comments, talk to the program officer, see what items in the reviews that you get were considered the most important problems, the most significant obstacles. You'll often get a list of concerns from a group of reviewers, and it's not always obvious which ones are important. So talk to the program officer and then revise your proposal. People who revise proposals according to advice generally do better. Not always. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen that somebody revises a proposal and the next review dings the proposal for all the things that the previous review said you should do. But I'm happy to say that after handling a lot of proposals over the years, those are very rare outliers. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It does happen. If it happened to you, I'm sorry. But in most cases, revising a proposal according to the advice, it will fare better. It won't always fare well enough to get funded, but it will rise up. Not many people are as persistent as the PI I had who got funded on his 17th attempt for the same project, but several with approximately 1 in 5 to 1 in 7 success rates across programs. You do need to be persistent. It does occasionally happen that we get a proposal that's already been awarded in a different program or a different way. That's relatively rare. Next. So the principles, I think you all understand this. We need the highest quality projects. They have to be pushing the frontiers of knowledge. We like transformative research. We like to have projects that may completely change the way we think about a given field. If you have a transformative idea and we turn it down, we didn't turn it down because it was potentially transformative. We turned it down because we turned down 6 of every 7. We've turned down a high fraction of projects anyway, and that includes the high risk, high return ones. Don't forget, we expect that there's some societal impact. This is public money being used to support the research. We do like some feedback for societal goals. We try hard to apply metrics to get the impact of the resources invested. to try to maximize the return, to try to emphasize the benefits to society. I'd be the first to say we're not always successful at that, but we do try, and in many ways we are successful. So next. So the criteria, there are two primary review criteria, and we explain all this to reviewers. Many of the proposers have served as reviewers and will serve as reviewers. So we have two criteria, the intellectual merit, which is that potential to push the frontiers of a given research area, and the broader impacts, which is about benefits to society and the achievement of specific societal outcomes, increasing numeracy and literacy, so on. Next. So on the two criteria, there are now 5 review elements. These apply to both criteria. So obviously the potential to meet the two criteria is clearly the first element. The second element is creativity, originality, high risk, high return, potentially transformative. So, we like creative, we like to see new ideas. You can't determine transformative without a basic set of knowledge, and so fundamental research is just as important, but we do like creativity and originality. The next element is, well, is it well organized? Is it actually going to happen this way? And is there a way to determine if it was a success or not? It's good if your plan has mechanisms. It's good if you have an approach to a sequence of results that will come out, or a sequence of publications, or various results along the way. The next element, of course, do you have the qualifications? Are you able to carry out these activities as you propose them? You don't actually have to be an expert in the field you're planning to do research in, although of course most people are, as long as you have a cogent and believable plan to attain that expertise. We do get proposals from people who say, I have a track record of research in this area, and I wish to switch to this area. And in order to develop that expertise, I'm going to do certain things. So you can propose to do something that you're not an expert in, as long as you have a credible plan to achieve that expertise. And then, of course, the fifth element, have you got what you need? Are the resources available, both as requested in the proposal, but also as provided by your institution or other areas? A lot of projects need computational resources. NSF funds computer centers that provide these resources. In many cases, you can get those resources as an extra at no cost to your project, but you have to specify that you're going to go that way, and that's what you need to carry out the project. So next, we get to the way reviews come back. You'll see a little later on, we're going to urge you to consider coming and reviewing for us. It's always, I believe it's a great benefit to proposers to see how the review process goes, to experience it from that side, see the sorts of difficult decisions, but also to get a handle on the sort of mistakes that people often don't realize they're making. And so if you review for us, you will see this sort of review advice given to reviewers that says, okay, look, here are the elements, the 5 elements listed at the top that we just went over. And now please fill in how you feel about this project with intellectual merit, with broader impacts. Some solicitations have specific extra criteria. Some of our computational programs require that any developed software be open source, and you have to include some statement or other about how you're handling open source software. And that would then be evaluated by the reviewers in this third box. And there are other specific criteria. Next. So types of review, ad hoc. Often we will send a given expert a specific proposal to review for us to write about. Some proposals will send to more than one expert, and in some cases, we'll send more than one proposal to the same expert for their evaluation. Panels, well, we've been running a lot of panels by Zoom video conference, others video conference methods as well, but we tend to like face-to-face when we can do it. And we've held review panels at places other than NSF. There's actually a very convenient option to go to a given professional society conference and have the reviewers all gather at that conference the day before or something like that and do a panel review and then attend the conference, since they're going to the conference anyway. So it's a good idea if your proposal is understandable by a non-expert, I mean a specific expert in the very narrow area. This can be difficult in some fields. There are areas of mathematics where it's very hard to evaluate unless you're an expert in that very specific mathematics. But in a lot of areas, you can make the case for the importance of your project to a broader audience than specifically the people working in your field, in your expert area. And it's a good idea if your proposal faces that, because panel reviewers, generally, it's a broader scientific knowledge, a broader judgment, and you may end up going to multiple panels, even within the same program. And it's a good idea if your proposal is comprehensible. Next. We will go through review. We may actually ask for additional review. Panels may ask us for additional review. Ad hoc reviewers will occasionally say, here's an aspect I'm not completely expert in, perhaps you should ask, and will suggest to us people that we could ask for additional reviews. We do have one category of internal review, proposals that are only reviewed by program officers. This includes proposals for planning an activity, and then the specific categories called the rapid response grants, the early concept grants, and the interdisciplinary science and engineering grants. And then the career life balance supplements, which are different. Those are all, in most cases, reviewed internally only. However, we are allowed to request external review on something if we feel we don't have the expertise amongst the program officers involved. The other category that comes up regularly is proposals for less than $50,000 as support of a conference. Most of the proposals we get to support conferences are not for full support of the whole conference, but for a specific aspect of the conference, a specific part of a meeting that is supported by other methods, sometimes by conference registration fees and sometimes by other organizations. So those are likely to undergo only internal review and thus can be reviewed more quickly in many cases. Again, if you're planning to submit something of one of these sorts of proposals, it's a good idea to talk to the program officer in your area before you submit. Some of these types of proposal actually require a statement from a program officer saying, yes, we will accept this proposal and look at it. We never say we'll accept it and recommend it, because until we've seen it, we can't tell if it's actually going to fit. So just because we say, yes, a proposal is acceptable, yes, you can send us a proposal, please don't assume that means it's going to get supported, because it still has to go through review and evaluation. Sometimes we get proposals that are written that we think, oh, we misunderstood what this was about when we saw the initial approach. So apologies, but it happens. Next. So we're always on the lookout for reviewers, particularly new reviewers with expertise that we need. We select by general areas, by specific areas, by detailed content. We select reviewers with understanding of public aspects of science, of education. We select reviewers with very specific knowledge in techniques and methods and very specific areas of science. A lot of reviewers are recruited because we, program officers at the NSF, all program officers are actually scientists of some area. Many of us still publish, still do research, although given the workload, not as much as we'd like. But we were all scientists at one point, practicing scientists. And so we know the research area. If you spend too long here, and you can argue I've been here a while, you do tend to get a little out of touch with the new people in the field. And so we like to go to conferences and meet people. And we also like people who suggest reviewers to us. So if you are asked to review for us, please, if you can't do it, suggest a few people you know, particularly new dynamic people who may be getting ready to submit their first proposal and would benefit from learning how the proposal works, how the process works, the proposal and review process. You are welcome to recommend reviewers. One of the options that can be added to a proposal is a set of suggested reviewers, and indeed a set of reviewers that you think we should not use if there are some issues in your field. And if you're not comfortable doing that, you can always email the program officer. Again, the ask early, ask often. If you have some concerns about a review, particularly if you've been through review and feel that something was a bit awkward, contact the program officer, please, and ask us. So next, we get all of that. So this is our pitch. Please become a reviewer. Please. Contact the program officer, tell us what you do, send us a 2-page CV or to ask if we'll take one. Tell us you'd like to become a reviewer. If we don't get back to you, I apologize. There are a number of reasons why you might not hear back, including the fact that we considered you, but you collaborate with so many people that the conflicts of interest ruled you out for serving on a review panel this year. You may get invited the following year, but it's complicated. But please, it's never a bad idea to drop us a note saying something like, have you had a chance to consider my email from, and nudge us to respond. Apologize if you don't hear back, but we do try to answer all such inquiries. We love review volunteers. We do. Please volunteer. Next. So the reviewers give us the most important input to the recommendation process. The reviewers are asked to consider the review criteria that we mentioned. They're asked to consider whether the plan is feasible, whether it's got enough resources, whether it fits within the time. We also ask them to consider priorities in the scientific field. We've had cases where people have said, this aspect doesn't need more observation, doesn't need more data, it needs more theory. And we've also had areas where they say we're awash in data, we need to fund more people to understand it. So the priorities enter into the recommendations. And then there's risks and benefits. We're not all that keen on high risk, low return, but high risk, high return, yes, if it's potentially transformative, we're quite keen on it. If the benefits are minimal, it's less likely to be considered timely and important. And of course, the reviewers are all asked to make written comments. So we provide that feedback to proposers. It's comments both for our decision-making process and to help proposers understand how the decision was made. Next, we have a panel. The benefits of a panel are that you can discuss it with other people. It's not at all uncommon for a panelist to say, oh, I missed that point. One can argue that if a panelist missed a point in the proposal should have made a bigger case for it. But different people see different things. So it's a good idea to have a panel review. We often do if we can. Many proposals go to panels. And the discussion then leads to a panel summary. And the panel summary can be as simple as the panel discussed this at length and decided that all the individual comments were perfectly valid and we didn't have anything to add. I mean, it doesn't mean that the proposal wasn't given a good discussion. It just means they didn't come up with any additional comments or extra arguments to present. And what the panel does for us is it gives us a relative merit judgment as well. It's hard for us to decide on everything, which projects are more important now, which projects are more timely. And so it's valuable to have a panel discuss that and give us some relative judgments on the proposals. So next we go, why you should do it. I basically mentioned this along the way. It's important that you understand the merit review process if you're going to write proposals. It's important to understand the sorts of problems that come up regularly. It's valuable to understand how to write a proposal. Proposals are not research papers. Most proposers to NSF have an experience with writing publications. That's not the same as the strategies for winning proposals. And of course, we think it's quite useful to meet us. Next. So NSF takes conflicts of interest very seriously, and Karen's going to talk about this now.
Thank you, Nigel. NSF's review process is known as the gold standard because in addition to rigorous scientific review, we do take conflicts of interest very seriously. Why? First, to remove any bias due to a panelist's affiliations with institutions and individuals that could affect the review. And second, to ensure fairness and to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. Next. When you serve on an NSF panel, you become a government employee. And as a government employee, you are subject to federal ethics rules and regulations, including those covering conflicts of interest. Examples of institutional affiliations that are covered by the conflict of interest laws include your employer. If you're a professor at a university, you will not review a proposal from that university because the law treats the university's financial interests as if they were your very own. Other examples of covered institutional affiliations include anywhere else you hold a position. You're an ad hoc faculty at a different university, or a consultant for a company. If you're looking for a new job, you won't review a proposal from that potential employer. If you're on the board of directors of an organization or serve as an officer of a scientific society, you will not review proposals from that organization or the society. Next. Examples of individual affiliations that are covered by the conflict of interest laws include your spouse, business partner, PhD advisor, and your PhD students. Your co-PIs and co-authors in the last 4 years and your co-editors in the last 2 years are also covered. We're seeing more situations where there can be 50 or 100 co-authors or 20 or 30 editors. If you're in one of these situations and you don't even know all the co-authors or co-editors, please be sure to let the NSF program director know this, because NSF may be able to waive these types of conflicts. In closing, it's very important to let NSF know about any affiliation you have with an individual or an institution in a proposal, even if it didn't appear on these slides. This disclosure allows NSF to determine whether there is a conflict, and if so, how best to manage it. Back to Nigel, who will discuss what you really want to hear about, and that's funding.
Thank you, Karen. Again, all these processes, there are regulations, rules, they're written down in various places, but your best bet If you're not sure, contact your program officer. Ask early, ask often. So, funding decisions. I must say, many people don't believe this, but I tell them regularly, it is actually part of a program officer's job to help you, to ask us for money in the way that makes it easiest for us to say yes. We really are trying to help you to write competitive, successful proposals. So we go through the merit review, ad hoc, panel, internal, whatever. We get feedback on the strengths and weaknesses of a proposal, on the relative merits, the relative importance to the field, the timeliness. We get some very good projects and people say, well, you know, it's not the right time to do this because X facility is not yet ready to deliver data or whatever. All this input comes together. The merit review is the most important input. Funding recommendations based upon that merit review are also guided by program goals, by NSF priorities, by balance, portfolio balance across institutions, across geographical proposals, geographical balance, level of institution balance, four-year colleges, research universities, teaching colleges. You know, we look for balance, we look for ways to support all demographics. We then make a recommendation, and those recommendations go to division directors, that is to the people above the program officers. In some areas, that's a section head. In most cases, it's a division director who will agree or reject. It's rare to have a recommendation rejected because by the time we get to a recommendation, we've done an awful lot of work to make that recommendation, but it does happen. And sometimes they're sent back for clarification and additional information, and sometimes they're flat out denied, but that's fairly rare. Next. The feedback that comes to a proposer includes how the individual reviewers rated the proposal on our standard NSF 5-point scale: excellent, very good, good, fair, poor. You get split ratings: very good / good, good / fair. You get split ratings. In some cases, you'll even get a radically split rating, such as excellent / poor. And then if somebody did that, their text, the review text that you also get to see, should explain why. And a common thing is you get an excellent on your intellectual merit and a poor on your broader impact. That happens. There'll be some sort of analysis of how well the review process feels you address the criteria, why the strengths and weaknesses were identified as they were, and if possible, reasons for turning it down. In many cases, I'm very sorry, but in many cases, the reason is only, I'm sorry, it wasn't quite as compelling as others. You were outcompeted by other proposals, and the budget simply couldn't stretch. We decline a lot of excellent proposals that are perfectly good science. We'd be more than happy to fund, but they had small weaknesses or were simply not as compelling. It's unfortunate, but you will sometimes see that remark. The panel summary, the discussion will be, we didn't really see anything wrong with it, but we weren't as enthusiastic about it as we were about other things. And of course, for all questions, contact the program officer who's listed. The program officer probably contacted you to give you the decision. Get back to them, ask early, ask often. Particularly if you're considering resubmitting, try to ask well in advance of rewriting the proposal, so there's plenty of time to assimilate the advice and rewrite your proposal. So next. Documentation, the physical documentation that carries those items that you get is copies of reviews of the summary. There's now a process statement. It's relatively straightforward, just says which review process you went through: internal, panel, ad hoc only, ad hoc and panel, and so on. And there are occasionally comments to the PI directly from the PO. It's not always possible given the volume of proposals. I do often try to send an email in which I point out what, in my judgment, were the most important concerns the panel had, that the reviewers had. Doesn't always happen. We apologize. Feel free to contact the program officer if you haven't heard. Next. So, commonest reasons for turning things down: competitive, as I said. I'm sorry, it's a competitive process. We get a lot of very good proposals. Some of them are just considered more compelling. Over my years of experience, 1 in 5, maybe 1 in 4 of the proposals have actual flaws that one could pinpoint. They didn't make a good case for something, or they proposed to use something whose performance has not been demonstrated, or something like that. But by far the commonest reason, simply not enough money. Competitive proposals, we get a lot of them. Next. So, revise and resubmit. I believe persistence is a virtue. I believe it's worth trying again. I believe it's worth talking to the program officer. You might have a program officer say, look, the way this went, I wouldn't bother to bring this project back. That's unusual. You may get, all right, so I believe, based upon my observation of the review process, that these are the things you should address. These are the weaknesses that you should spend the most effort to correct. Keep the strengths. If strengths are identified, keep them, and then think of ways to strengthen it. We do suggest that you talk to your colleagues at your institution. There are people who have successful proposals working in the same department with people who have unsuccessful proposals. Get their opinions, get their advice. That's a bit institution dependent. Some places are more collegial than others, but think of ways you can strengthen the resubmission. Don't just send us back the same proposal. I had a proposal come back for 3 years in a row where they didn't even update the letters of collaboration. Reviewers notice that sort of thing, and it doesn't do you any good at all. Rewrite, update, try again. Contact the program officer who turned you down. Try to contact us ahead of the next deadline so there's time to do the revision. Next. Now, if it really seems that something went wrong, and contrary to public opinion, program officers are human beings and we do make mistakes. We have been known to get something completely wrong. We try not to, but we're human. So it's possible that something really was wrong. The process, the NSF process, allows you to request that a declination of we're sorry, we can't fund you, can be requested for reconsideration. And the process, multi-step process, start by asking the program officer. If you're not comfortable with that, go to the program officer's immediate superior, the division director or office head. If you're still not satisfied with the explanations given at that level, then you can send a written request to the assistant director of the directorate or other designated official, depending upon offices as opposed to directorates. And please, within 90 days, if it goes too long, we're not going to consider it a valid complaint. If the decision is still upheld at that point and you're still not satisfied, you can go to the Deputy Director of NSF. NSF currently does not have anyone with that designation, but we have a Chief Operating Officer, which is the same function. Reconsiderations occasionally work. Occasionally we really have made a mistake and messed up, and a proposal that was turned down can get funded. It's rare because, as I was saying earlier, many of the reasons why a proposal cannot be funded are competitive, not enough money in the budget, priorities in the community. And that's not a failure of the process. It's not a failure of the expertise of reviewers. Nevertheless, reconsideration process is there. Talk to the program officer. See if you really want to take that formal step. Next. So now we come to the fun part about funding. A good competitive proposal addresses all the review criteria. Read the paperwork, read the solicitation, make sure you've done that. It has a good chance of having a high impact on the field, of broadening participation amongst underserved groups, underrepresented groups in that research area. There's a good chance of educational impact, of training the next generation of researchers, both at the graduate student level and at the junior researcher, postdoc, new faculty levels. It has a good impact on your specific institution, on your area, or even your state. We have specific programs, for example, for tribal colleges and universities. Nevertheless, there are many programs that will consider that a factor in funding. Some programs have very special considerations. Career, which is our program that identifies leaders in the next generation, has very specific considerations that you should always address if you're going to submit a career proposal. Career in particular, because you have a limited number of attempts, contact a program officer. Ask early, ask often. Research at undergraduate institutions, we're keen on that. The established program to stimulate competitive research, keen on that. There are various good considerations there. And there are other programs. Just because we didn't list it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. One of the factors that comes in is other support. To some extent, it's an issue of level of effort. Some PIs try to get lots of research projects going at the same time and can't handle it. Some PIs can handle multiple research projects. That's a consideration. We may turn down a very well-reviewed proposal because it's unconvincing that it can be carried out with the resources they've got. There are issues in starting a new subject, launching a career, launching a center, launching a new PI into the research area versus maintaining an established area, maintaining a successful program that generates lots of work, lots of papers, lots of research. And of course, there's always the issue of portfolio balance. We try not to fund 5 people working in the exact same area of a given field, sometimes 2, but not that many. And so sometimes a well-reviewed proposal will not be funded because we've already got too many enough activities in that area. Next. So, as I mentioned earlier, the program officers do not actually issue funding. We make recommendations that are then concurred with our management, by our management if we've written a good recommendation, and they're then handled by a grants and agreements officer in DGA, Division of Grants and Agreements. And they have the legal authority to make the award. And there are certain bureaucratic criteria that matter. We don't like to give money to institutions if we don't think they have the management capacity. And this is an interesting one because if your institution gets audited by government auditors, it's not the same as a commercial audit. And so adequate grants management capacity is a rather more serious requirement than simply being able to manage money. It's important that your entire program report on the work that's already been funded. Overdue reports are one of the biggest issues for us. We give people money, we want them to do the research, but we then want them to tell us how well they did. And we accept the fact that some reports will say it didn't work out, or some research doesn't. but we need those reports in to demonstrate that you did at least try the research. And some reports are great, very successful. It's a good idea, please, to check for overdue reports and get them in. And there are occasionally issues with the institution or the specific PI that might block a recommendation from a program office, from the division. That's the responsibility of a grants and agreements officer. And sometimes the institution will be contacted by the grants and agreements officer and asked for additional paperwork, for additional evidence. Sometimes that involves the program office, sometimes it doesn't. But a recommendation from a program officer is not a guarantee of funding. It's important to know that. It's important to understand that if a program officer says, I've agreed to fund your program, your project, that's not a promise, because they're not allowed to do that. New program officers in particular occasionally are careless with the language and will say something like, we're going to fund you, even though what they really mean is, I've recommended we fund you. So you have to be a little careful. Don't assume until you hear from the grants and agreements officer. Next. There's a lot of information on the NSF website. In some cases, you might consider this too much. I've argued some of our paperwork is unnecessarily verbose. Unfortunately, quite a lot of our paperwork is necessarily verbose. There's a lot of details that have to be included, and so the paperwork can be quite long-winded. Quite a bit of the paperwork is actually boilerplate that's repeated in different solicitations, and you may have read it already in different areas. So don't be put off by voluminous paperwork. Go to the web page, search around. Go to the web page, look for program officers in the area you want, and send an email to several and say, look, I'm trying to understand this. Again, I said earlier, it's part of our job to help you ask us for money. Next. You can find us on these org lists on the web. Ask early, ask often. You'll hear it a lot. I think we are at the end, and we'll now switch over to taking questions live. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Nigel and Karen, and thank you for answering a lot of the questions that have been coming in the Q&A. So hopefully you'll get a chance to take a look at those answers. Before I get to some of the questions that we haven't answered live here, I wanted to, Nigel, bring up a question that we received in the session before this on proposal preparation that we didn't get to, but it really was more appropriate for this session on merit review. And the question was basically stating that, you know, there are rumors that NSF really only cares about the intellectual merit of the proposal, and it's not as important to highlight the broader impacts. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about the NSF position on this and dispel this rumor a bit?
Yes. There are lots of misconceptions that float around, and there are lots of statements, even by people at NSF, that are actually not consistent, or perhaps I could go even as far as to say not correct. One of the more amusing things that happens to me is people tell me, NSF told me X. And I always ask, you know, NSF isn't a person, so which person told you that? Because that's often the source of misconceptions like this. Plus, things change with time. So, the intellectual merit and broader impacts criteria are equally weighted in the review process. We don't control what reviewers tell us. I had a reviewer one year who actually wrote in all his reviews that he didn't believe in broader impacts. We didn't use him again, but the point is that there are different weightings applied by different people, by reviewers, by program officers, by programs. We try to have a balanced portfolio. Some awards we make will have relatively limited societal impact, but we'll balance that out with others that have a lot of impact. So we want all the proposals to consider this. As I said in the presentation, This is public money we're giving you, and we want some feedback for how this benefits the public. As you know, I'm in the Division of Astronomical Sciences, and you can imagine we regularly get the question of what good is astronomy to the nation? And we have lots of answers for it. So the weighting that's applied in any given program, the nominal weighting is equal, but I can't put my hand on my heart and say every program does that. But also, more importantly, it's a portfolio balance. And so an individual proposal may win by having brilliant intellectual merit or lose by having really bad broader impact. We've had proposals that were considered very successful science, but had a very poor broader impacts program. Get turned down. It's not something. I would not take the rumors as valid. Lots of them float around. I mean, I occasionally sit on Facebook and watch a debate about something that happened at NSF that I was involved in. And of course, I can't speak up because I have internal confidential knowledge, but it can be very frustrating to see the misapprehensions that go around of that sort.
So in following up then, I see there's a question that came in saying, well, if intellectual merit and broader impacts, if broader impacts is as important as intellectual merit, how do you quantify that in terms of space allowability in the 15-page project description?
Yeah, I mean, to a large extent, it's up to you. You have to write a competitive, persuasive proposal. You have to write something that convinces us that this project, your project, is something that we want to support over and above all the other projects that we get. It's a genuine competition, as I've said. It's not an absolute determination of the merit of your project, your activity, your science. And so whatever your program is, it has to be feasible and convincing. We get quite impractical plans sometimes to go out and do very large outreach programs. And we have outreach experts who do review as well and just basically say, this is hopelessly overambitious. And so you can put too much weight in one area or too much or too little weight. It's a very difficult one. You have to persuade us that the proposal is the greatest thing and that you can carry it out. And I don't know how much text it takes to do that.
Okay, I'm going to attempt to summarize this first question that we have here. And that question is that, or it starts off with a number of NSF solicitations they've noticed are requiring partnerships with minority serving institutions. So how can institutions of higher education demonstrate to reviewers that they're engaging in these relationships in a manner that is equitable and also benefits the project?
You're not trying to ask me, are you? I don't know how you get to be convincing. Track record is always a good piece. We have been working with these people for years. We have programs where they can demonstrate that they have graduated underrepresented minorities or that they have influenced. I don't know how you are persuasive. I contend, generally speaking, that a proposal in some sense needs to be a page turner, that if someone reads it and one of our reviewers reads it, you want them to be turning over the pages saying, I want to know how this comes out. I want to know this answer. But I can't tell you how to write one that does that. You have a plan, you demonstrate it, you show what you intend to do, you'll get review feedback. And as I said in the presentation, one of the important things about review feedback is to try again, be persistent if you're turned down, and pay attention to the comments, because that's the best way to move forward.
Okay.
Sorry, no, that's not as helpful as you might want.
A couple of questions asking about how does how do flaws, like minor flaws, come into play in reviewing proposals such as grammar? Like, how is that weighted in comparison to other criteria?
Generally speaking, it isn't, because most scientists know that most scientists are not very good writers. But again, you want a page turner. If you have a reviewer who's reading your proposal and keeps tripping over typographical errors or grammatical errors or badly typed equations or things, or sentences that are difficult to understand, you don't want the reviewer to pick up a reason to resent your proposal. You don't want the reviewer to be annoyed reading it. And a lot of, our reviewers generally, I'm always amazed by how conscientious they are, how hard they work to understand a proposal, which is sometimes not very well written, I'm sorry to say. They work hard at it, but you're much better off if you've proofread it. And it's not really the minor grammatical things that get people. We get proposals with weird things in them, like, according to brackets, enter reference here, close brackets. Somebody should have proofread that. So that sort of thing, don't upset the reviewers. That's good advice.
Good. Another question is asking, can you talk a little bit more about the panel discussion process? Specifically, does the panel rank all the proposals received and then choose the top ones? So how does that shed a little light on that panel process a bit?
Well, again, panels are a bunch of our colleagues from the community, and as we all know, our colleagues are not always completely consistent or don't always do things the same way. Generally speaking, most panel review, and again, in your specific area, you should always ask the program directors, ask early, ask often, the mantra. You should always ask the specific program directors, because there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of variation. Generally speaking, a panel will do an initial assessment based upon written reviews, based upon their own reading and so on, and put things in categories. And they'll then rank things within the categories, or sometimes move things between categories. I can tell you there's usually a lot of debate, and a lot of it is hard to inform, because, for example, we often are running reviews before we know budgets from Congress. And so quite often we don't know if we're going to be able to fund, only the top project, only the one project that the panel thinks is the best, or whether we're going to be able to fund half a dozen. It's not usually that big a range. So there is a lot of debate. Even when panels don't write a lot, sometimes I've had quite short written discussions, even though the discussion itself was quite long and detailed. We try not to, we try to reflect that discussion, but sometimes. But again, ask the program director.
Can you comment any on the success rates for beginning investigators? And if not on success rates for beginning investigators, do they get any preference from NSF?
Yeah, we do demographics a lot. Unfortunately, recent changes to the law make it impossible for us to give out demographic information as easily as we used to, but we do them a lot. Generally speaking, most programs have pretty similar success rates regardless of the type of institution, four-year colleges, research, whatever, regardless of the level of the investigator, beginning, later, experienced, emeritus, postdoc. Some institutions allow postdocs to be PIs on proposals. Some institutions don't. That's not an NSF rule. So generally speaking, it's all much the same within small number statistics. there are programs that emphasize specific things. Some of the bigger programs are not very conducive to beginning investigators because they want a track record of demonstrated capability of managing a large effort. And so that can be rather harder for a beginning investigator. It doesn't always work that way. I had one from a certain institution whose first proposal was for a massive international collaboration, and everyone enthused about it, and we funded it. So there are things like that, but generally speaking, there's no variation. But again, in the area you wish to apply to, ask a specific program director.
We have time for one more question here, and it's the questioner is stating that they've had many rejections from NSF, and they're suspicious because the PI is not from a STEM field. So do you have recommendations or suggestions? So should the architects and designers, when they're not working with scientists and engineers, just stand back and let the STEM folks lead? What are your thoughts on that?
Gosh. Well, the part of the review process, as I discussed, is can they do the work? Can they carry out the project as defined? That doesn't require you to have, card-carrying credentials in the specific area, but it does require you to demonstrate that you can carry out the work, or that you have the team to carry out the work, that you have the expertise and you have a managerial ability to organize the project in that way. It's hard to be generic about that. I mean, I did mention in the presentation that I've seen people who didn't have a record but showed that if the proposal was funded, they had a plan to go out and get the expertise or recruit the support they needed. So I would say it's highly unlikely that the rejections are due to not having card-carrying STEM professionals, or whatever the definition is. But it would require, I would have to go look. You should go and look over the reviews and see what people said. One of the things we see regularly is people get in this mode where they think that everything at the NSF is random. It's purely a random process. And so they submit a proposal with the same flaws several years in a row, and they don't pay attention to the reviews. And I've had the same thing happen. Somebody calls me up and says, we weren't getting funded. And I said, well, if you look at reviews from 3 years ago, they said, do this. 2 years ago, they said, do this. Last year, they said, do this. This year, they're going to tell you, do this. I recommend you do this. There are people who get in this mindset that it is random. It's not random. I mean, in most cases, if you pay attention to review advice, you do better the next time. I won't tell you that there are no cases where doing the things a review suggests actually make it worse the next time, but that, in a lot of experience of a lot of proposals, I would say is very rare, the end sigma, end of the tail. I'm sorry, I've gone on a bit too long.
That's just quite all right. I want to thank Nigel and Karen for joining us today, and please make sure to join us tomorrow for sessions that will cover award management, the Office of International Science and Engineering, and the role of the NSF Office of the Inspector General. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, everybody.
And I thank you all for attending.
Thank you.